Earlier today, we have already heard a lot about the geographies of Wikipedia and how geography has an impact on Wikipedia. And I would like to expand a bit on this and put this into some context about what's going on into the geographic information area. Well, I was wondering how many of you remember this? This is a bit of the Carta Pisana of the internet. This is the first version of Google Maps back in 2005, and as you can see, there are a few missing parts as well as in the Carta Pisana, just minor things missing. But, I mean, things have evolved quite a lot since then, and in the last decade, more or less, there has been quite a sort of a little revolution in geography and geographic information science, and things like Google Maps and other sort of web mapping platforms and the widespread presence of GPS in mobile cell phones and smartphones gave us a lot of people the opportunity to contribute geographic information through platforms like Wikipedia, like Openstreetmap. And was a big contribution to what we now call volunteer geographic information, which is exactly the same principle of Wikipedia, but specifically focused on geographic information. So how do we represent geographic information on Wikipedia? So we obviously use place names, which are obviously titles, and we use the same place names in text, in descriptions, and we use these place names in the text both as a description but also creating a relationship, geographic relationship between entities like Oxford and England, or Oxford, which is within the Oxfordshire. We use pictures, which are sort of geographic content. They give description in a way to this particular entity, and they give qualitative information, the same as symbols. And going toward a more quantitative content, we use maps. And finally, we use coordinates, which is becoming more and more a way to identify objects, entities, and especially to link them. So in particular, if you go to the edit page, you will find latitude and longitude information, which you can define within the info box. And in a similar way, within the text of a web page, you can use the coordinate templates to define coordinates. So the info box will define the primary, it's called the primary geotag of a page, whereas this coordinate template can be used to define any other geotag of the page or of entities which are described in the page. When you click then on the link we've seen here, this is a link, this will lead you to the GeoAct tool. The GeoAct is a tool hosted by the Wikimedia Labs, which enables you to link the Wikipedia entity, the Wikipedia article, to a set of other data set. So for instance, you can have a link to Google Maps. So the latitude and longitude that you have used to geotag the position of your article are linked to a particular point in space. So in this case, a point in Oxford. And we'll see how this plays out in interesting ways, where exactly you pinpoint something. In fact, one of the other services that you can link here, or you have a link to here, is Geonames, which is a gazetteer, or a list of place name, a global gazetteer and an open one, which is vastly used in geography to analyze text. And this is the point in Geonames, which is linked by the GeoAct tool. And as you can see here, this point on Geonames was created in 2006. and then was edited by the Wikipedia. I'm not really sure who this user is. Most probably is somebody within the Wikimedia Foundation, which has introduced content from Wikipedia into GeoNames, or the GeoNames team themselves, which has imported data from Wikipedia. So this is how you see Oxford in GeoNames through Wikipedia. But at the same time, GeoNames itself has another definition of Oxford, which is the Oxford district, which is instead being created by the Ordnance Survey. Okay? And similarly, from the GeoAc, you have a link to Openstreetmap, which is another service, as I already mentioned, which is similar concept of Wikipedia, but for maps, where people can upload and edit the content on this service. And if you follow this link, you will then end up here. And one interesting thing is that all these three services define Oxford, and they use slightly different points when it comes to points where to define Oxford. And at the same time, again, if you search for Oxford in OpenStreetMap, you will end up with this, which is not a point at all. It is a polygon, is an area which is defined as Oxford. All this is interesting in three particular aspects. On the one hand, this is interesting in an ontological way. So how do we define Oxford? Is it a point? Is it an area? On the on a second aspect is epistemological. So where does this knowledge come from? How is this created and modified? And there's been a very interesting paper recently by Huckley about the epistemology of volunteer geographic information. And on the third point, we have practical issues. So each one of these definitions of Oxford, when used by software, by algorithms, by tools, apps, will lead you to different results. So if you search for restaurants in Oxford, just to give you an idea, if you use this polygon, you will get some restaurants. If you use 1 point and, I don't know, a 2 kilometer radius, you will get different restaurants, okay? Then on a completely different level, the question is, what kind of geographies, what kind of data are we creating? What is included in this data? This, for instance, is a map of all geotags on Wikipedia. And as you can see, half of the geotags are in Europe, okay? And the whole Africa includes only 2.5% of the whole geotags. And other things, other entities like Japan and North America are relatively well covered, but still, difference is astonishing. This is the result of various things. First of all, where people edit Wikipedia from, and we already heard about this. The other issue, or the other component of this, is language. So different language, and this is a bit of a weird representation of that, but different languages have different percentage of geotagging in them. So English is about 20% of the pages are geotagged, whereas Polish is 46%. And especially the Asian languages have a relatively low percentage of geotagging within them. Now, the next step is to put this into a broader context, okay? So we have seen that the geotagging in Wikipedia has certain geographies itself. So there is very much a density, a concentration of data in Europe. Similarly, if we go back to what I was mentioning before, GeoNames, this gazetteer, we can see some similar geographies. So again, we have, and this is again a point density map. So we have very high density in Europe, in North America, maybe less in Japan, and very little detail everywhere else. But then each single data set has his own idiosyncrasies. So for instance, in Geonames, there is a very high concentration of information about Nepal, because a few years ago, the European Union financed the construction of a gazetteer of Nepal, which was released in open source, and then it ended up here, with the result that there are more place names about Nepal than about India, okay, which is slightly larger and slightly more populated. Again, if we go from Geonames to Openstreetmap, we see very similar geographies. Again, slightly different, but very similar. Europe, North America. In this case, Japan is very prominent. And this is also a reflection of, as in Wikipedia, where people edit from, where the technology is available, where in this particular case, especially where smartphones with GPS are available. At the same time, if we could zoom in here, we will probably see very high content in Haiti, because after the recent earthquake, there was a big campaign to create, from satellite pictures, to create maps of Haiti to help the rescue services. So this is becoming more and more important in the context of what Heather was discussing, this new technology that enable people to link one database to the other. And this is a representation of what is called Openlink Data. That is a set of big data sets all connected to each other. And the very risk in this case is that if all these data sets have similar geographies and similar inequalities in how different parts of the world are represented, the risk is that they reinforce each other, creating more and more inequalities. And then these old data sets will be used to analyze knowledge, to analyze books, to analyze internet content, and will replicate this data program data cycle, creating more and more inequalities. And this is the sort of cycle that we need, and it needs to be somehow broken. But the current situation, and again, is probably a bit of a grim picture, as we were hearing earlier today, is that the inequalities at the moment are expanding rather than this technology are creating more and more inequalities rather than a level field. And that's more or less what I wanted to talk about. Thank you very much.